So we left off last time in book 9 with Satan having entered the garden at the point at which Adam and Eve have parted ways, and Milton captured in those speeches, I think, quite remarkably the ability of both of the human pair to reason and to persuade, and in each of them there's an admirable character. These are you can imagine a king and a queen having language like this if they were unfallen. So I think he does try and capture something of the majesty of unfallen Adam and unfallen Eve in the speeches, and contradicts the charge that's sometimes levied against Milton that he is a misogynist or something like that, which is just, I think, a little bit silly. It doesn't really address what we're finding here. But the two having parted, Satan spots Eve on her own, and in the guise of a serpent begins his temptation. Now he's in the serpent, as I say, because the serpent, with its twists and turns, is the thing that's best able to disguise him. That's the rationale that Milton gives. Again, that's not in the biblical text. There's not a lot of this is reading it and creative license, and you have to grant him that. Again, it's not supposed to be a literal account, but it is clearly rooted in a scriptural account. He's not deviating from it. It's not an allegory. It's not presented in terms of departure from the text. It purports to represent revelation here, and he sticks to it more or less. So he begins the temptation and says this, and as I said to you, and Milton will explicitly say this, he adopts the persona of a humanitarian. He presents himself as a friend to mankind. He doesn't present himself as an enemy. He clothes himself as an angel of light, as it says in later in the New Testament. But here he's not even presenting himself that way. He's presenting himself as a creature, and one that adores her and adores her rightly. Because again, remember, even Satan regarded her to be so not just beautiful, but good, that he saw the image of God in her most visibly expressed. And so it's natural and right for all the creatures to, in a sense, worship her. And that's what this being does. So in a sense, I mean, it sounds odd, and you think, well, wouldn't you have, the trigger that something might not be right, that this creature is acting this way? And the answer is no. The only difference is that it's speaking. And so that's what she marvels at. So let me begin by reading a bit of the text. "Wonder not," says Satan, "sovereign mistress, if perhaps thou canst, who art sole wonder, much less arm thy looks the heaven of mildness with disdain, displeased that I approach thee thus, and gaze insatiate. I thus single, nor have feared thy awful brow, more awful thus retired. Fairest resemblance of thy Maker fair, thee all things living gaze on, all things thine by gift, and thy celestial beauty adore with ravishment beheld, there best beheld where universally admired. But here, in this enclosure wild, these beasts among, beholders rude and shallow to discern, half what in thee is fair, one man except, who sees thee? And what is one, who shouldst be seen a goddess amongst gods, adored and served by angels numberless, thy daily train?" So he recognizes, which something that we already know to be true, that she bears the image of God, and yet she does it in the fairest fashion, more so than Adam. There's something about her in this sense. And as such, all living beings admire her because they admire God. They're made by God, for God. Of course they look upon her bearing the image of God with admiration, respect, fear. No fear here per se, but a sense of awe. Fear in that sense of awe. He's in awe of her. And he says, and yet, he, being a beast without reason, without speech, is not really the best audience for this. She ought to be seen and admired by her peers, and there's only one of those, and he's a man, and his name is Adam. But it ought to be the case that she is admired by the whole of the host of heaven, just as God himself is. So he's already manipulating subtly her to think that there's something unjust about her current situation. She's down here, God's up there. She bears his image, all admire her, and yet the admirers are not particularly those who can truly appreciate her for what she truly is. So that's how he begins it. And note that he is flattering her. But again, the flattering is not wholly departing from reality. He's saying true things about her. So glozed the tempter. This word glozed, we don't use this anymore, but basically it's flattered. Lied or spoke false flattery. The tempter and his proem tuned. Into the heart of Eve his words made way. She likes it. She likes what he's just said. It's appropriate. You can be flattered through the truth as well. But there is something fraudulent about it, and the fraudulence is that she, even though she bears the image of God, ought to compare herself to God and see herself as somehow being mistreated. In the same way that Satan, in the company of the angelic host in heaven, thought himself not treated appropriately by God. He felt that his merit was injured when Messiah was elevated as God the Son. He thought that it ought to have been him. So so he's giving the satanic way of looking at oneself. You deserve better. Into the heart of Eve his words made way, though at the voice much marveling. At length not unamazed. Now this word amazed, again, the coils of the serpent are called amazed, and this word keeps coming up. Milton keeps playing on the word mazed, because what he's going to do is lead her through a maze. I don't know if you've ever been in a maze. In Europe, in Britain, they often have them made out of hedgerows. In fact, if you've seen the Harry Potters, they do these things. You go in, and then you end up, after you go around a little bit, you get lost, and you can't find your way out. Because, of course, it all looks the same. And after you've turned a few times, right, left, you are disoriented. You don't know where you are. That's the effect of his speech on her. Just note. But not unamazed, she thus in answer spake. What may this mean? Language of man, pronounced by tongue of brute, and human sense expressed. The first, at least, of these I thought denied to beast, whom God on their creation day created mute to all articulate sound. Articulus is your finger, your index finger. It points at things. So you use sounds in order to indicate it, and very specifically to indicate it. You're not just taking your nose like a dog, like a pointer, and pointing at it. It's indicating, it's using sound to very specifically say this, not that. That's what Adam and Eve do. They use speech, just like God spoke the cosmos into being. Adam and Eve have that faculty, which God alone up to that point possesses, and the angels, but the beasts do not, that of using language to relate to things. And this beast does suddenly have articulate sound. How is that so? So that's why she's wondering. The latter I demur, that is the human sense, for in their looks much reason, and in their action oft appears. Thee, serpent, subtlest beast of all the field, I knew, but not with human voice endued. Redouble then this miracle, and say, how camest thou speakable of mute? And how to me so friendly grown above the rest of brutal kind, that daily are in sight? Say, for such wonder claims attention due. So how did he come to speak? To whom the guileful tempter thus replied, Empress of this fair world, resplendent Eve, easy to me it is to tell thee all what thou commandst, and right thou shouldst be obeyed. I was at first as other beasts that graze the trodden herb of abject thoughts, and lo, as was my food, nor aught but food discerned, or sex, and apprehended nothing high. Till on a day roving the field I chanced a goodly tree far distant to behold, loaden with fruit of fairest colors mixed, ruddy and gold, I nearer drew to gaze, when from the boughs a savory odor blown, grateful to appetite, more pleased my sense than smell of sweetest fennel or the teats of ewe or goat dropping with milk at even, unsucked of lamb or kid that tend their play, to satisfy the sharp desire I had of Tasting those fair apples, I resolved not to defer. Hunger and thirst at once, powerful persuaders, quickened at the scent of that alluring fruit, urged me so keen about the mossy tree trunk. I wound me soon from high, for high from ground the branches would require thy utmost reach, or atoms. Round the tree all other beasts that saw, and with like desire, longing and envying stood, but could not reach. Amid the tree now got, where plenty hung, tempting so nigh, to pluck and eat my fill. And so what does he go? What happens at this strange alteration in me? To degree of reason in my inward powers, and speech wanted not long, though to this shape retained. Thenceforth to speculations high or deep I turned my thoughts, and with capacious mind considered all things visible in heaven, or earth, or middle, all things fair and good. But all that fair and good in thy divine semblance and in thy beauty's heavenly ray, united I beheld. No fair to thine equivalent or second, which compelled me thus, though importune perhaps, to come and gaze and worship thee of right, declared sovereign of creatures, universal dame. So what is the effect of the fruit? What does he claim? He claims that he had a capacity now for reasoning and speech that he lacked before. He was raised above his station. He became like man. In the appearance, yes, of a serpent, but now he is able to do things which he could not do before. Now, Milton may have in mind here something like the great chain of being, in which we have the God at the height, the angels below him, man, he's made a little bit lower than the angels, it says in Scripture, and then the beasts, and then the vegetation, etc. This is called the great chain of being. What Satan is claiming is that though he was a beast, he's been elevated up the chain of being. And become like man. He has the same capacities. And that's why he adores her. He now has the reasoning capacities which the other beasts lack. And the other beasts didn't take of it, even though they wanted to, just because they couldn't reach it. He got up there by slithering around the trunk. Not sure how this would work with things like giraffes and elephants and whatever, which doesn't even bother asking that. Maybe it's so high, but if it's that high, how on earth would they reach it? Anyway, that's the effect on him. So his mind has been awakened, and although his body belies the change, his mind and his speech suggest that there's a spiritual transformation within him. Likewise, then, by analogy, if you eat of this, you will also become more spiritual. Remember, the prohibition is that if you eat of the forbidden fruit, you will become as gods, knowing good and evil. Right? Become as gods. So it's already been stated by God, you'll become as gods. And so in a sense, it's an easy path for Satan to go to suggest that this is what the fruit does. It conveys godhood on her. If it conveyed manliness on him, or rational speech upon him, what will it do to her? It will vault her to be godlike as she ought to be. In other words, the thing that she desired right at the outset, from the beginning, to be beheld by all those who are worthy to appreciate her. What's her response? So talked the spirited sly snake, and Eve, yet more amazed, thus unwary, yet more amazed, unwary, thus replied. Remember, she's been warned by Adam to be wary, but she's immediately wary. By the way, in the commandment to Adam in the garden is to tend and to keep the garden, and that by to keep means to protect. Don't let any enemies come in. Adam's already failed in this by letting her go. He's warned Eve, you be vigilant, but he's already lacked vigilance by allowing her to go. Right? And now she's not being vigilant, even though she's been explicitly warned not long before this, just as they departed. She's not vigilant. She's amazed by what has happened here because she sees it with her own eyes. Serpent, thy overpraising leaves in doubt the virtue of that fruit in thee first proved. You're over egging the pudding, as the British would say. A little bit too much here. Okay, the sole empress of the world and universal dame, sovereign of all creatures. But say, where grows the tree? From hence how far? How many are the trees of God that grow in paradise, and various yet unknown to us? In such abundance lies our choice, as leaves a greater store of fruit untouched, still hanging incorruptible till men grow up to their provision, that is, humanity multiplies to sufficient quantities that all the different types of fruits in paradise are tasted. At this point, they haven't even got to all the trees. Which tree was this? And more hands help to disburden nature of her birth, to whom the wily adder, blithe and glad empress, the way is ready, and not long. Beyond a row of myrtles, myrtles always associated with temptation in Renaissance literature. On a flat, fast by a fountain, one small thicket past of blowing myrrh and balm. If thou accept my conduct, I can bring thee thither soon. Lead on then. On he goes. And he goes through this, and I'll skip over the epic simile here. And then they come to what? The forbidden tree. She knows this tree. So of this tree, she didn't know many of the trees. This one she knows. And her response is simply, Serpent, we might have spared our coming hither. Fruitless to me. Though fruit be here to excess, the credit of whose virtue rest with thee. Wondrous indeed if cause of such effects, but of this tree we may not taste nor touch. God so commanded and left that command, sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live, law to ourselves. Our reason is our law. So she immediately says and gives Satan a hard no. Forget it. Okay, up to this point I'm listening to you. I'm moved by what I see in the changes in a serpent. Now you have the capacity of a human being to reason and to speak, but now you take me to the forbidden tree and there's no way I'm going to eat of that. That's it. We're done. And cites the prohibition. And what is the prohibition? Of this tree we may not taste or nor touch. Now, can you tell me what? Now this is in Scripture, but what was God's commandment to Adam? Yes. Not to taste. So not to eat, not to taste. But he didn't say anything about touching. So there's been an additional prohibition here, which seems irrational. It seems irrational. Eating, okay, but touching, what is it? Like, what is this? Eating may seem, but touching seems a little bit of additional. They're adding a little prohibition. Where did the idea that touching is a problem come in? Well, probably from Adam. Adam may have been to be vigilant, a little extra cautious, like you are with your kids. I don't even want you to go near that. Don't go near the pool. It's not only don't stick your foot in the pool because you can't swim, don't even go near it. Right? It's just extra cautiousness. And she's repeating what she's heard there. Remember, the commandment was given to Adam while Eve was still a rib. She wasn't around to hear it. She's heard it from him. He's told her. But not even to touch it. And left that command's sole daughter of his voice. The rest we live, law to ourselves. Our reason is our law. And now the tempter comes. And as I say, he adopts a humanitarian guise here. And says this. Indeed, hath God then said that of the fruit of all these garden trees ye shall not eat, yet lords declared of all in earth or air? What's the point of the question? What's the point of the question?
I think the serpent was tricking the lady because he said, "Are you sure God said do not eat?" And she said yes. It want to know her man.
Thank you. Yes?
He's tempting her. God put you as Lord and Lady of this, but he's restricting.
Right.
Are you really Lord?
Right.
So there's a contradiction, a fundamental logical contradiction between what you are named and your conduct. And remember, Eve's own logic in saying she should part ways from Adam was that if she can't leave his side, then she's not free, she's restricted. Right? If I can't go where I want, then Eden isn't Eden. This is not paradise at all. It's a very pleasant prison house. I can't go where I want to. And that's not how God created us. He created us free. You know that. You know he created us free. And he says, I can't argue with that. That's correct. He did create us free, but he warned us. So he warns her and says, yes, you're free, but you can fall. So there's a contradiction. That allows, and Adam says, okay. Right? I can't argue with the logic there. He neglects his own commandment to tend and to protect there. He no longer vigilant. He sends her away with the warning only. Now, same issue. It's a logical contradiction. They have been called lords of all the earth or air. And yet, they're not allowed to eat from the fruit of the tree that the serpent did? Are the animals forbidden to eat from this tree? No, but you are. So are you not of a lower status than the animals then? My goodness. Sounds to me like you're God's pets. He's going to go on and say more, but note the logical contradiction. He pushes hard on this. This is unjust. Defies natural justice. To whom, thus Eve, yet sinless, now she's following his logic. She's thinking Satan's thoughts along with him, but she's not committed any sin. After the fall, our thoughts are also filled with sin. Our logic is corrupted. We rationalize things. But she's not yet there. This is Milton's challenge, to present an unfallen being listening to Satan, following his logic, and yet not really corrupted by sin. So her heart is not corrupted. But her reason is misinforming her will to do what God has expressly forbidden. And Eve responds, yet sinless, Milton acquaints us. Of the fruit of each of the tree in the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of this fair tree amidst the garden God hath said, ye shall not eat thereof, nor shall ye touch it, lest ye die. As I've already said, he never says you're not supposed to touch it. But he's following the biblical text here. She scarce had said, though brief, when now, more bold the tempter, but with show of zeal and love to man, and indignation at his wrong, new part puts on, and as to passion moved, fluctuates, disturbed and yet comely, and an act raised as of some great matter to begin. And now in epic simile, as when of old some orator renowned in Athens or free Rome, where eloquence flourished, since mute, to some great cause addressed, stood in himself collected, while each part, motion, each act, one audience, ere the tongue. Sometimes to height began, as no delay of preface, brooking through his zeal of right, so standing, moving, or to height upgrown the tempter, all impassioned thus began. So note, an orator, a defender of freedom, he appeals to, in the epic simile, to Greece and Rome, and to speech, so he's an orator, again, persuading of the good, and here the wrong done to mankind by the prohibition. Oh, sacred, and what does he do? First thing he does is he commits idolatry. Oh, sacred, wise, and wisdom-giving plant, mother of science, now I feel thy power within me clear, not only to discern things in their causes, but to trace the ways of highest agents, deemed however wise. So in other words, he knows God's mind, not just things in their causes as Adam did, but even to understand the motivations of God. In other words, he's above God. His ways are discernible to us, and we can see the malice in the intent of the prohibition. Queen of this universe, do not believe those rigid threats of death. Ye shall not die. How should ye? By the fruit, it gives you life to knowledge. by the threatener, look on me, me who have touched and tasted, yet both live, and life more perfect have attained than fate meant me. Now he appeals to fate again. Fate as if fate overruled gods. He talks like a pagan. Remember in the ancient pagan epics, the fates determined everything. The gods simply have to do what's fated. They can't change what's fated. Zeus and others, there's a higher form of God called the fates. They determine everything. Free will is sort of a mirage. So he appeals to that, as if God is lower than what is determined, as if more perfect than attained than fate meant me, by venturing higher than my lot. Shall that be shut to man, which to the beast is open? Or will God incense his ire for such a petty trespass, and not praise rather your dauntless virtue, whom the pain of death denounced, whatever thing death be, deterred not from achieving what might lead to happier life, knowledge of good and evil. Of good, how just? Of evil, if what is evil be real, why not known, since easier shunned? God therefore cannot hurt ye, and be just. Not just, not God. Not feared then, nor obeyed. Your fear itself of death removes the fear. Why then was this forbid? Why but to awe? Why but to keep ye low and ignorant? His worshippers. He knows that in the day ye eat thereof, your eyes that seem so clear, yet are but dim, shall perfectly be then opened and cleared, and ye shall be as gods, knowing both good and evil as they know. That ye should be as gods, since I, as man, internal man, is but proportion meet. I of brute, human, ye of human, gods. So ye shall die, perhaps, by putting off human to put on gods. Death to be wished, though threatened, which no worse than this can bring. And what are gods that man may not become as they participate in godlike food? The gods are first, and that advantage use on our belief, that all from them proceeds. I question it. For this fair earth I see, warmed by the sun producing every kind. Them nothing. If they all things who enclosed knowledge of good and evil in this tree, that whoso eats thereof forthwith attains wisdom without their leave. So if they have power over things, then how can we gain this? Against their, they don't have all the answers. They don't have all the power. They don't have all the wisdom. It doesn't come from them. It comes from the tree. And wherein lies the offense that man should thus attain to know? What can your knowledge hurt him, or this tree impart against his will, if all be his? Or is it envy? And can envy dwell in heavenly breasts? These and many more causes import your need of this fair fruit. God is humane. Reach then and freely taste. He ended, and his words replete with guile, full of guile, into her heart to easy entrance won. It's over. Keeps going into her heart. Goes to the core of her being. What he's suggesting here is which is fascinating when you look at the entirety of Scripture, because in some sense it's anticipating a closer proximity between God and man than they already enjoy. Remember, he walks with them in the garden, and she desires to have more of that. One day that God will provide that by means of the incarnation, when God becomes man. Right? And we've already seen the Son offers himself as a sacrifice to atone for her transgression, for the transgression of Adam and Eve. And at one day he will bring heaven and earth together and create a new heaven and a new earth in which they will dwell in the presence of God. Right there. Right? They will come together. So in a sense, what he's appealing to is what is already implanted in her heart, to be with God and see him face to face, and to be in that sort of close proximity all the time. But this is not the root. She's choosing to disobey rather than to obey. If she had obeyed, the whole of the earth would have been Edenized. Eden would have spread out over the entire earth through the whole of humanity, and God would have resided with them. That was plan A. But God knew what was going to happen before, it says this in Scripture, a lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. Right? A lamb was slain before the foundation of the world. How is that? It's God foresaw that sin was going to happen and already intended grace. The thing that her heart most desired, he would already provide, but not through the means that she saw fit to bring it about. Through grace in him, rather. But she buys this. Let me not get off track any further. She buys what he says, and she looks at this. She fixed her on the fruit she gazed, which to behold might tempt alone. And in her ears the sound yet rung of his persuasive words, impregned with reason to her seeming, and with truth. Meanwhile the hour of noon drew on, and waked an eager appetite, raised by the smell so savory of that fruit, which with desire inclinable now grown to touch or taste, solicited her longing eye. Yet first pausing a while thus to herself, she mused. And she speaks to the plant, which already shows that she's lost her mind. She's not yet committed the sin, by the way, but she's clearly misled. She speaks to the plant in a sort of a soliloquy. Great are thy virtues, doubtless best of fruits, though kept from man, and worthy to be admired, whose taste too long forborne at first assay gave elocution to the mute, and taught the tongue not made for speech to speak thy praise. Thy praise he also, who forbids thy use, that is God, conceals not from us, naming thee the tree of knowledge, knowledge both of good and evil. Forbids us then to taste, but his forbidding commends thee more, while it infers the good by thee communicated, and our want. For good unknown sure is not had, or had, and yet unknown is as not had at all. In plain then, what forbids he to know? Forbids us good, forbids us to be wise? Such prohibitions bind not. But if death bind us with afterbands, anyway, she's just going to follow the logic of that Satan is presented here in her own mind and persuade herself. So it's interesting. First the words come from the outside, then she replicates the logic in her own mind, and she leads herself to disobedience. So saying, her rash hand, in evil hour, forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound. Interesting. So an immediate consequence of this is the earth from which Adam and Eve have come. Remember, Adam is clay, and she from his side. The earth is also implicated in her transgression. Not that it's guilty. It has no rational capacities and so forth. It doesn't bear the image of God. But it's still affected by her action. And nature from her seat, sighing through all her wokes, gave signs of woe. That all was lost. Back to the thicket slunk the guilty serpent, and well might, for even intent now wholly on her taste, not else regarded. Such delight till then as seemed in fruit she never tasted, whether true or fancied so. Though expectation high of knowledge, nor was Godhead from her thought. Greedily she engorged without restraint, and knew not eating death. Satiate at length and heightened as with wine, jocund and boon, thus to herself she pleasingly began. And again she speaks and worships the tree. So she immediately, thinking that she is becoming a god, lapses into pure idolatry. She worships the tree. Speaks to it, worships it, but then thinks for the first time of the consequence. What am I going to do next? Suddenly she thinks about Adam. She knows that God has said that she's going to die if she does this. What does that now mean? She sort of skipped over that bit. She was so attracted by the prize of divinity that she didn't really think what death could mean or evil. And now she does think about it. What could it possibly mean? Well, now she knows what good and evil are. She starts to be able to think about what this could be. 8:15. But to Adam, she says, in what sort shall I appear? Shall I to him make known as yet my change, and give him to partake full happiness with me? Or rather not, but keep the odds of knowledge in my power, without co-partner. So I'll just keep the good effects to myself, and he'll have to worship me. So I just keep that. I'll be now his superior. And so to add what wants in female sex, the more to draw his love, and render me more equal, whatever that means, and perhaps a thing not undesirable, sometime superior. For inferior, who is free? That sounds like Satan. Right? He said that his freedom was impaired by his inferiority. So she appeals to equality while acting against it. This may be well, but hold on for a sec. What if God have seen and death ensue? Then I shall be no more, and Adam, wedded to another Eve, shall live with her enjoying, I extinct. A death to think. Confirm then, I resolve, Adam shall share with me in bliss or woe. So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life. So immediately resolves to share it with Adam, but why? She resolves, if I'm going to die, I'm going to kill him as well. So she resolves to murder him. I love him so much. The twisted logic. If I'm going to die, then Adam could have another Eve without me. Can't have that. Jealousy pushes her on, like Satan. Okay, well, I will give him, and I do it out of pure love when she's clearly just done it because she can't bear the thought that she shall die for her transgression and that Adam should live with another Eve. So I'm going to kill him too. That's her resolution. Not how she presents it, but that's effectively the logical outcome. So saying, from the tree her steps she turned, but first low reverence dawn as to the power that dwelt within. As I say, she does a little curtsy to the tree. Off she goes, comes back and speaks to Adam. Hast thou wondered? Not wondered, Adam, at my stay. Thee I have missed, and thought it long deprived thy presence. Agony of love till now not felt, nor shall be twice. I'm never leaving your side again. That was so hard. For nevermore mean I to try, and rash, untried I sought, the pain of absence from thy sight. But strange hath been the cause, and wonderful to hear. And wonderful to hear, where is it? This tree is not, as we are told, a tree of danger tasted, nor to evil unknown opening the way, but of divine effect, to open eyes and make them gods who taste, and hath been tasted such. The serpent, wise, or not restrained as we, or not obeying, hath eaten of the fruit, and is become not dead as we are threatened, but thenceforth endued with human voice and human sense, reasoning to admiration, and with me persuasively hath so prevailed that I have also tasted, and have also found the effects to correspond. Opener mine eyes, even more open than they were before. Dim airs, dilated spirits, ampler heart, and growing up to Godhead, which for thee chiefly I sought. Liar. I did it for you, chiefly. Without thee can despise. I chiefly sought it, but without you I can, take it or leave it. Well, you can't take it or leave it. You've already taken it. For bliss, as thou hast part, to me is bliss, tedious, unshared with thee, and odious soon. This is a total liar. Thou therefore also taste, that equal lot may join us, equal joy as equal love, lest thou, not tasting, different degree disjoin us, and I then too late renounce deity for thee, when fate will not permit. So be careful. You should do it, but if you don't do it, watch out. Maybe I won't give it to you after all, and I won't renounce my deity, and you will bear the absence of me forever. So there's a combination of lying and threatening. Thus Eve with countenance blithe her story told, but in her cheek distemper flushing glowed. On the other side, Adam, as soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed. By the way, he has flowers in his hands. He misses her so much. He has flowers in his hands to greet her with. He's plucked the flowers. He's going with them, and look at his hands. Remember, they left with hands clasped and they parted hence. The hands are telling, the flowers are telling, the maize is telling. The play on these words repeatedly is just magnificent. Soon as he heard the fatal trespass done by Eve, amazed, astonied stood. He's astonished and blank, while horror chill ran through his veins and all his joints relaxed. From his slack hand the garland wreathed for Eve down dropped, and all the faded roses shed. This is a poetic device reflecting the consequence of sin. Death. The flowers in the garland that he's just plucked immediately dry up and fall to the ground. It expresses his feelings. It expresses the consequences of her action. She's dead. He's looking at a dead woman speaking to him. What does the death mean? Well, she's clearly living in the sense she's still talking and breathing. So it must mean something else. But he recognizes the enormity of what she's done. Speechless he stood and pale, like the beast before, and like the beast now. Till thus at length, first to himself, he inward silence broke. Now, so this is a soliloquy. He doesn't even say it to her. He says it to himself, inwardly. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's work, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet. How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote? Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee, yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forgo thy sweet converse and love, so dearly joined to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, I feel the link of nature draw me, flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted bliss or woe. What's the difference between what Adam does and what she did? She's tricked. He's not tricked. Which makes his action even more inconceivable, I think. He's not deceived. And so here, Milton, it's questionable. Again, in the text, Eve gives Adam the fruit, he eats of it. That's it. It's no explanation whatsoever. Milton gives explanation. The explanation is that he can't bear to be parted from her. He loves her. He recognizes that what she's done is wrong, that she's devoted to death, and he resolves to share her choice, even though he knows it's wrong. He's not deceived. Well, that's what it says in the New Testament. Adam was not deceived. He's following the scriptures to some degree. Adam was not deceived. He knew it was wrong. He did it anyway. He did it, why? Out of love. But what did he set aside? The love of God, first of all. He put her ahead of him. The medievalists who used to categorize types of sins called this concupiscence. He loved his wife too much. Or uxoriousness, rather. Uxor is your spouse. He loved his spouse more than God. That's the sin that led him to transgress. He didn't want eternal life. He didn't want to become like gods. Eve chose that. He chose it out of love for his wife. Mistake. Put his wife first. So having said as one from sad dismay recomforted and afterthoughts disturbed, submitting to what seemed remediless, thus in calm mood his words to Eve he turned. Bold deed thou hast presumed, adventurous Eve, and peril great provoked, who thus hast dared, had it been coveting to eye that sacred fruit, sacred to abstinence, much more to taste it under ban to touch. But past who can recall, or done, undo. Not God omnipotent, nor fate, yet so perhaps thou shalt not die. Perhaps the fact is not so heinous now for tasted fruit, profaned first by the serpent, by him first made common and unhallowed ere our taste, yet on him found deadly. He yet lives, as thou saidst, and gains to live as man, higher degree of life, inducement strong to us, as likely tasting to attain proportional assent, which cannot be but to be gods, or angels, demigods. Nor can I think that God, creator wise, though threatening, will in earnest so destroy us, his prime creatures, dignified so high, set over all his works, which in our fall for us created needs with us must fall. Dependent made. So God shall uncreate, be frustrate, do, undo, and labor lose. Not well conceived of God, who though his power creation could repeat, yet would be loath us to abolish, lest the adversary triumph and say, fickle their state whom God most favors, who can please him long. Me first he ruined, now mankind, whom will be next. Matter of scorn not to be given the foe. Whose words does he echo here? Messiah's. This is exactly what the Son said to the Father. If Satan is allowed to prevail, then you will be dishonored. All your work will be undone. Satan will triumph. This cannot be. And grace is the way forward. Adam has no understanding of grace here, no expectation of it. But he knows that God cannot allow the last answer to be death. It would go against his whole nature. He can't, and he won't. He has confidence in that. However I with thee have fixed my lot, certain to undergo like doom. If death consort with thee, death is to me life. How about that? Who's that sound like? Satan. Evil be thou my good. Death be thou my life. If it's with you, I resolve to die. So forcible within my heart, I feel the bond of nature draw me to my own. My own in thee, for what thou art is mine. Our state cannot be severed. We are one flesh. To loose thee were to loose myself. What could he have done differently here at this point? Is there anything he could have done different? What does he not do at this stage? What are his options? We know what he did do. What could he have done differently? Just conjecture a little bit. What could he have done differently?
He could have asked God.
He could have gone to God with the problem. He assumes that God is going to kill Eve, and he doesn't want that outcome, so he's not going to go there. What he doesn't know is what the reader already knows, which is that man shall find grace. And here we have man, Eve will find grace, Eve being man. And what could God have done here? Obviously, justice needs to be done. What Adam cannot conceive here is that God himself will become man and offer himself as the atonement for the sin that she committed. Adam can't even fathom that God would do such a thing, to condescend to become the being and bear his own wrath for the transgression just committed. He doesn't understand the gracious. He doesn't understand the mind of God, the plans of God. Remember, God, although he's not just higher, his ways are unfathomable. His grace, so marvelous it is. He could have done that, and God has already promised that, but he doesn't do that. He resolves to eat. He eats of it. Eve is so delighted with him. He eats. I'll just go over this rather quickly. Tenderly wept. And she gave him of that fair enticing fruit, 996, with liberal hand, with free hand. Irony here. Liberal means free. Here it's enslaved to sin, with liberal hand. He scrupled not to eat against his better knowledge, not deceived, but fondly overcome with female charm. Earth trembled from her entrails, as again in pangs and nature gave a second groan. Sky lowered and muttering thunder, some sad drops wept at completing of the mortal sin original, while Adam took no thought, eating his fill. Remember, in Scripture it says that the whole of creation is subject to futility and pains, like birth pangs. Milton's echoing this language here. The whole creation groans for redemption. And they go back to it. At this point, then they commit, they have sex, but now it's motivated by sin and lust and not by the love which we saw earlier. Actually, we didn't. It was in book 4, however. And what do? They then fall asleep, and then they wake up, and what do? They start blaming. The blame game begins. O even evil hour, thou didst give ear to that false worm, of whomsoever taught to counterfeit man's voice, true in our fall, false in our promised rising. Why? Because they perceive that they're naked. How did they know they were naked? Didn't know before. They were naked before. What? They've lost their native righteousness, their native sense of dignity. It's been lost with it. So what has been lost is not on the external. They look the same as before. They will eventually not look the same because they're going to physically die. They're going to deteriorate. They're going to get older. They're going to be subject to illnesses and so forth. But for now, it's a wholly internal effect. They look at each other differently than they did before. Now they look at each other with lust. And it's one thing to look at the other person and say, wow. It's another to know that you're being looked on in the same way in a fashion that is objectifying and not loving the object that you're looking upon. It's a different understanding. And you know, if it's happened to me, it's also happened to her, and vice versa. They look upon each other differently. They're aware of the change. They're upset about it. They're scandalized by it. There's a sense of their native dignity having been lost, and they cover themselves. So rather than becoming as gods, they are humiliated. And that word humiliated they're brought down. They're humbled. And they start accusing. And the end of the whole passage here is extraordinary. Thus they in mutual accusation spent the fruitless hours. Note again reference to the fruit, but now the hours are fruitless. But neither self-condemning, and of their vain contest appeared no end. So now they're acting like Satan in the sense that they are slanderers. They're throwing the diablos. They're throwing insults at each other. They're blaming each other. This is what Satan does. He's the accuser. Now they're accusing each other. That's the end of book 9.